Welcome to the Be All You Can Be, M.S.C., the podcast dedicated to empowering Army Medical Service Corps officers and professionals like you. I'm your host, Stephanie Moore. And on today's episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast, we spill the beans of running the gauntlet through AIM Marketplace. Now, we talked about Cobra Kaiing the market, so now we're going to share some invaluable tips to make sure the odds are forever in your favor. We welcome today Major Zach Patterson. Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Zach, we're here to talk about some of the MSC course favorite topic, and that is the AIM Marketplace, which you were a mover in last summer.
That's correct. Yep.
I would love to hear about how did the AIM Marketplace go for you, and I guess what was your favorite thing about the AIM Marketplace?
I would say, well, first of all, I had a very positive experience in the market. So I don't know if that's the case for everyone, but I will say, as far as my favorite, I definitely enjoyed the transparency. So being able to see everything out there. So I know, still stressful, still, you're picking up your life and moving it to another location. But I definitely enjoy the transparency, just seeing the options that was available to me.
Absolutely. And I would have to say, I agree as well. It's nice when you can see all of the options available to you, not just as a mover during that cycle, but things that you might not even have known were jobs out there. I personally was a mover at the same time, and I actually am in a job that I didn't even know existed. So it was eye opening to see all the positions that were available. So, what was
Yeah.
your least favorite part about the marketplace?
I think my least favorite was, and again, this could be just my personal experience or it could be a trend. But when it came to the inconsistency from I don't want to say hiring officials, we can call them hiring officials or the units, just the inconsistency in the engagement or lack of engagement and how each unit approached marketplace differently. And so, again, I don't know if that's something that's even on the docket to educate or train these senior leader or in the human resources channels or S1s of the world. But yeah, I had everything from let's set up an interview to no interviews. I'm just doing file reviews. And again, every teach their own. So it would really no sweat off my back, but it was just a little bit of like, okay, how are we doing this? It's kind of like you're relearning every unit as you go.
It's interesting you bring that up because there is an AIM marketplace guidebook for the commanders. It doesn't really, like you said, it doesn't lay out like very strict guidance on what has to occur. It gives a discussion about, what they have to do on their end with regards to review the candidates, select them. It does offer that they can interview them, but it doesn't really mandate a process. And I found that to be true as well. And oftentimes it was either you had a unit that either had one person in charge of it, and that one person was not the person that was in charge of interviewing. So there was a little bit of disconnect. Or you had very heavily involved organization that did interview panels. It like you said, it was a very inconsistent marketplace. So I would love to hear some of your TTPs that you could share that you use to reach out to market yourself. Does anything you did to prepare for the marketplace?
I would say preparing is I probably definitely didn't do as much. I think I was still trying to figure it out as what the appropriate next steps was sometime for how I was going to engage units. I knew early and often was going to be a good TTP when it came to contacting a unit or prospective units that I know I didn't want to wait to the end of the market to like let's start trying to manage my career here. And so I found that to be very beneficial. As soon as it opened up, I was signaling and then even like looking for an incumbent and or like the contacts that were made available through what we could see as movers. And so that was definitely a good TP early and often. I feel like is a good something to good for anyone to take forward. Just contacting the unit, but then also making sure your resume is put together. Whether anyone's going to look at it or not, that's again some of that inconsistency. There's clearly some interviews where I know no one had taken a look at my resume just because of some questions was like, well, you obviously didn't look at my resume. So, but there's
I
the
hope you
having the
didn't
resumes.
I hope you didn't say that.
No, definitely no. That would not be a good TP. But no, it was just one of those things. It's kind of you're cracking a smile on the TCon because it's a question where like, okay, I know the answer because it's the second bullet on my resume. So that was a good. Just those baseline things that you'd be surprised. I think that some people aren't actually reaching out to units and they're expecting the units to go to them. And I don't think that if we weren't in the army, and maybe it's just a culture thing, but you wouldn't do that in a civilian in the civilian world. So you can't expect that to happen when we're going to officer driven talent management and when it comes to a marketplace.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, the whole reaching out, because I've talked to other officers who have struggled where they're not getting the check mark back, indicating they're in the top 10 of the unit selected candidates, and they don't understand why. And when I've asked them, well, have you reached out? Like, did you send an email asking for an interview, telling them you were interested in that position and like immediately? And also, making it in your top 10, and oftentimes they haven't. And, I'll share my own TTPs is day 1, I mean, first of all, I don't know about you, but I was like, "Holy shnikey." I was like, there was 97 jobs I could see, captain through colonel, and I had to focus on lieutenant colonel positions, primarily based off, the fact that my primary zone was meeting, so I knew when I PCS'd, I would either be promotable or promoted, hopefully. And I reached out, I think I sent emails to probably my top 20, 25. And I said, "Oh, hey, this is me. I'm interested in this position. Here's my AIM resume." I even included kind of a career map timeline, just to get a better indication of where I was. And that was very successful in getting me at least interviews, even for positions where they were looking for more senior individuals. I at least got an opportunity to interview. So I agree wholeheartedly with you on that, Zach. So what about on the interview side of the house? Do you feel like everyone was a good interviewer, or did you feel like you had to carry some of those interview conversations?
A little mix of both. I think there was some that were clearly very rigid. I know I've joked before when it comes to like I feel like it was straight out of a CPAC manual or handbook or civilian hiring like oh the TDA or fixed facility, and that's okay, and I can appreciate that because they're trying to be standardized and uniform. But then I found that some were very conversational, which again I think that's a good parallel to what I mean. I haven't been I'm not in the private sector, but I can imagine when that's dependent on what corporation, company, business, or where you're trying to seek a job for. There's going to be different personalities in those hiring officials, and so I would say it's probably the same for us. And so I've preferred the interview type, being that I mean that individual, whoever's hiring me, essentially, 'cause that's what it is, right? They're hiring me, they're betting on me, and so but it's a two-way street when I'm going to be working for that person and with that person. And so I appreciated the conversational because they're interviewing me, but I'm also interviewing them. And so I think that was to me beneficial than just the tell me about a time where you had to be successful in blah blah blah. Blah. It's like, okay, cool, that's neat. But then I'm not getting to that person that I'm probably going to work for the next 2, maybe 3 years, and so or in that organizational culture. So I found the interviewers that had the more conversational and they're trying to legitimately get to know what kind of person I am and what kind of officer I am. Those to me were the best ones, but I didn't have any where I was having to like drive the conversation.
That's really good to hear. And I also experienced the whole conversation-based interviews as well. And I think what was refreshing, like you said, is you do get a sense of the culture of the organization. And I think units sometimes forget that we also have the ability to say yes or no to them.
Really.
If we feel like we're not a good fit for that culture or that mission set, depending on where we're at in our career. So, do you feel like you knowing yourself and knowing your own leadership style helped you have those conversations and be more successful in them?
I think so. And from a standpoint of you have to be confident in or at least have some self reflection and know where your strengths are, where your blind spots are, areas that you may be weak in. experience levels. And so I think there's some internal self reflection that needs to take place before you even get ready, or you're coming into the marketplace and knowing what type of job you're looking for. Frankly, there's some, and I was coming from the Army Medical Logistics Command, and USAMA, and both of those organizations. I was there when AMLC began in 2019, and saw that for the first 2 years, and we hit COVID and had time in USAMA. So I had seen very, not saying I'm any sort of guiding leadership of it, but I had been, I would say, behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz. I've seen in some seeing big picture things when it comes to like as far as sustainment. And so I knew the type of job I was looking for, which I ultimately found myself in ASCC, and I really knew where I was trying to steer, I guess. So I wasn't, and there's depends on where you're at in your career. I wasn't trying to work in a sustainment brigade at that time. It's not a knock on the sustainment brigade, but I know where I was trying to pursue, what next step I was trying to pursue based on the experience I gained and where I felt that I could bring value to an organization. And so, it just depends on where you're at in your career, but I think you have to know that going into the market too.
And so, is a part of that, let's go a little bit deeper here because I do know that you're married to your better half and you all have kids. So, when the marketplace opened and you looked at the jobs, had you and your better half already had conversations as to what the priorities were? So, obviously, you kind of had an idea professionally, but how did you balance that with your family?
It was so new that I knew, well, we knew it was going to be a joint decision off the bat. So I know I can preface this with that is that we were going to do it as a team. As far as I mean, I got to walk to the virtual interview room. But as far as the preparation and seeing what was out there, that was a together thing. And now, granted, I saw it, the market, I think during the duty day, of course, whenever it opened up. But you better believe, as soon as I hit the house, I was pulling it up on, pulling AIM, the marketplace up on the computer at the house, and we're looking through and just saying, hey, here's just what's available. And this is where I kind of think we're at. But it was definitely it's a together decision. But beforehand, I think things were so new. It's just like, well, we'll know what we know when we see it. Generally speaking, we knew we wanted to be somewhere like geographically southeast. That would have been optimal. Just getting because we just done 3 years. We've been in Maryland for 3 years, and we're both originally from Georgia. Obviously, all of our families in Georgia, and so that was definitely a pushing factor. Is pushing us towards the southeast. But I mean, there could have been nothing available that met any of the criteria. So we were definitely just kind of going into it very open minded, and I hate to say, just kind of rolling with the punches, and we'll see what pops in there when we open the browser.
That was
So,
actually probably a good way to go into it because I feel like there's a lot of emotions that happen to folks when they go in the AIM marketplace. I don't know how you felt when you first opened it up and you were waiting for units to signal back. It seemed like it took them about a week to get themselves straight, and then you started getting the signaling, and you're anxiously waiting like a bad dating app. Like, is this person
yeah.
like me? Are they gonna like me back? I put them as my number one.
Yeah, I can definitely. So that's, and I think that goes. I can definitely relate to that because, but also like the job I'm in now, I may have not. I got a green check mark until like after I'd done all of my interviews, if that makes sense. Like I don't think, depending on how well the unit is managing the mark they're in, whatever they're looking at. I, just from my limited experience, which is one time, so is that the green check marks can either put you into some false sense of security where you think you are because things may change at the end. I had green check marks that I didn't reach out to any of these units. I had, I think at some point like 10 or 12 of check marks that like half of those I didn't necessarily reach out for. So I feel like that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Because not only that, but you have to go in the marketplace every day because the mid-market review, when that occurs, they actually do add jobs and they do remove positions. And that's dependent on if someone last minute had to be removed from the AIM marketplace because did a packet for stabilization, or there was a new requirement last minute that was validated by HRC and the Army, and they add it to the marketplace. Like the position that I'm currently serving in and was lucky enough to get didn't get added until the mid-market review. So I would say the last week is when I got the phone call that they wanted me. And so let's talk about that. How many units actually communicated with you if they wanted you, because I'll put it out there. So when you went into AIM Marketplace, you had this big warning sign. You had to agree to all these rules. And what I found, at least in talking to folks that were moving, is many didn't actually read the rules. And the rules specifically said that the units couldn't ask you where you were ranking them, and you couldn't ask them. However, it did not say that you couldn't willingly disclose it. And so I'm curious, like the position you're in, did they say, hey, we would like to hire you? We are going to preference you as our number one. Did that occur? Or how did you know where to rank folks?
Well, I will say I read every single line. I don't know if I can't remember. I'm sure I glanced at the rules, but no, but I was aware of we weren't supposed to discuss, or not weren't supposed to discuss. But to your point, like you weren't supposed to ask them, they weren't supposed to ask you. But I can say on good authority that I'm sure everyone who's been through it once, there may have been conversations of who's asking who, but I personally don't have a I didn't have a problem with the times that I was asked. I was fully transparent with people. I definitely volunteered where I was, to your point. I volunteered that information to like just say, hey, sometimes that to me also is a good back to the TTP question is a good way to if you're interested to where you are on their list and just be transparent up front and say, "Hey, I'm looking. This is where I want to be. It's my top position, and maybe or this is you're in my number two right now, but maybe that will kind of solicit. They're not running the CPAC interview. Maybe they'll say, okay, hey, look, yeah, we got you here at three, or you're going to be our number one pick. So maybe think about that. So they're volunteering that information. You're volunteering, they're volunteering. I feel like that could also work in your favor to again to have that as a DP. Because one thing that I don't know of anyone who did it, it wouldn't work out well anyway. But what you can't do is go around telling everyone that they're your number one. That's definitely not going to be to fit your favor because at the end of the day, they're going to know when you don't show up. It's, it's a small community. Someone will find out, or they'll just know when you don't show up and there's no MAC P deal. They're like, oh, Zach said we were his number one, but yet Zach is not here. And so even I did on this end because people we have come into my current organization, it was a similar thing. But they did the right thing. I know of one individual particularly that followed back up our leadership or and team there and said, "Hey, my dream job just dropped into the market, and I'm going to pursue that. You guys were in my number one. You're now my number two." And again, that's just a professional TP.
Oh, absolutely. Because the AMED is 13 degrees of Kevin Bacon. I don't know if you've ever heard that. You know someone who knows Kevin
Right.
Bacon. And also from a perspective of you should be making sure that prior to going in the AIM marketplace, your references that you've reached out to those officers because they're absolutely critical. What you don't want to have happen is someone call those references and they're like, Zach,
Yeah. Who is that?
when did I work with? You want them to call up and be like, "Oh, Zach, yeah, he is an absolute outstanding leader. You want him. He did blah, 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 blah. Great things, walks on water." And I think
Yeah, you gotta be careful with that, especially when you talk to or you wanna put down you wanna do the flex and put down like a 1 star or 2 star. You should be aware that you know them for sure, but make sure, like, you're working with them on a day-to-day basis and you've told them and talked to them and they know who you are.
well,
So,
and
the flex may not pay off in the end.
exactly. Well, and also we can't assume that someone knows we're a mover, even if we did know them well. So I know me
Right.
personally, I emailed my references ahead of time just to reconfirm, hey, I've got you as a reference. I'm going to be a mover. I even told them that I would send them the ranking of the jobs that I preference because you can download the spreadsheet. And that allowed me so that when they got the phone call, they could speak better to my qualities or my characteristics as a leader that would apply to that position. And one of my references had asked me for that. And then I kind of made it my TP for the rest. And it actually, and my current boss who hired me after 2 interviews, he did know 2 of my references very well. So, absolutely critical, I think, is the reference piece on there.
Well, that's very good, I think, to that I'm gonna take away for sure is, talking to your I mean, I did the same about emailing. And one of my references was a mentor of mine. So we were having the dialogue. I was having the dialogue with him about jobs I was pursuing, getting this feedback and things like that. But the other two, while they knew I was putting them down, but also I think, like you said, put the jobs that you're pursuing once the market actually opens up. Like I did all the prep work before it opened and put them down, and or told them I was going to put them down. Made sure my resume was as tight as it could be. Got that good 100% green, made me feel good about life. And then, but then like I didn't really follow up with the other two, I guess, and that sounds bad, but I thought in my head, I'm like, well, I told him I'd put him down as a reference. So if Lieutenant Colonel calls and says, "What do you think about Zach?" He or she's gonna be like, "Oh yeah, these good people." But what I didn't prep him with is like, I'm pursuing the medlog planner at U.S. Army Central, and so and then that way they would be prepared to say, "This is why Zach is good for that position." Not just that he's a good person, a good officer, or whatever. Okay, at this and that. It benefit your reference to kind of talk about you and how you would be well suited in that position that you're pursuing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's was a little bit disappointing in the rollout of AIM, and listen, nothing's ever perfect when they roll anything out. I think the material they've provided has been great. There's some great YouTube videos on the algorithm behind the AIM marketplace, because for all our audience out there, in case you didn't know it, there's an actual algorithm that places you in positions. And that is why it's so critical you make that list, because if it doesn't match you, you don't have a match. The algorithm will keep going till it finds a match. But if you only rank order 10 jobs and then there's no match, you get thrown to the wayside like a bag of chips. And you get to wait it out until everyone else gets their assignment. So
Yeah,
I wish they did, though, have better, like a TP guidebook, because let's face it, some officers have never interviewed out there. And how do you interview? And interviewing is a skill that requires practice.
absolutely.
And I try to offer advice when I talk to others, keep it simple, use the car method, give us a challenge and action and what your results were, and tie that to your leadership style and be comfortable speaking and being true to who you are and sharing that. Cause like you said, I think that ties to that conversational piece. Like, are you a good fit for that team and that culture? And I think the more comfortable you are sharing who you are as a leader, I think that will entice the unit to want to select you. And ultimately, we think we all want to receive that little check mark and have options, feel like, oh wow, I have these options.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, question, because I know there are a lot of officers that deal with emotions, and there were times I had my emotions would go up and down, and I had to remind myself of all these TTPs we're talking about. So, how did you deal with the emotions of the marketplace? Because the marketplace isn't like a 1 day thing; it's over a span of almost a month and a half.
It's definitely a marathon. You're right. And you got to keep monitoring it as well because for whatever reason, things come on, come off, and yeah, I'll never understand that. We can't make a decision to stick. I'll keep the soapbox there, but you gotta. It's a marathon, and so you have to. Everyone deals with it differently. I would say for me, it's more faith based, and so for me and my family, and it comes to I know I can only control what I can control. And so there's obviously there's a prayer involved for me personally, and when it comes to like just knowing where that I'm gonna be there for a reason. And so, and just kind of keeping that at the forefront of my thought process when I'm either, and there's some humble pie being eaten through this marketplace. So it's not all roses and rainbows, at least wasn't for me, where I'm like, and I'm not going to say the organizations, of course, but there's like, I'm thinking I could do a division medlog job and then I'm not even getting a call back. And I'm like, oh, and there's a little bit of you that was, but I don't know if you know who I am. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know what I've done. You know what I mean? I'm not just an average. And now they'll say that like it's not because it's like I know what you do. Like, you know what I mean? I'm a medlog officer. Like, this is what and it's just, it's whatever. But so it's a humble pie, but there's eating at some points. But well, that's all joking, of course. But when it comes to like, I don't know if you know who I am, but there's definitely a lot of control what you can control. And if you can't, and you do your best not to focus on it. And I still have to work on stuff like that. But there's a lot of faith involved that there's a bigger plan for me and my family. And so I just have to put my best foot forward and do the best that I can and do the best I can to put myself in a position. for my family to be successful, and then everything else, it'll take care of itself.
Feel like I should have been calling you for emotional support during my marketplace, Zach. I had to eat some humble pie too, and I will tell you, I probably didn't deal with it necessarily as well as you did. I will. My first interview was a fake interview. They scheduled an interview with me on a Teams call several days later for a position, and I studied. I pulled up the unit, the mission. I felt confident in what I brought to that mission set and that position, and they came on to tell me that I didn't have enough rank for the position. And, I asked them to reconsider because I was looking at an awkward time in my career where my primary board was coming up. But I knew my MOP analysis from my career managers. So I asked if they would reconsider and let me interview. And they were like, nope, we're not interviewing you. And they made a meeting though, just to tell me that. And
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I got off the call and I had to kind of gather myself a little bit. I called my husband for emotional support because it does. I think at the end of the day, we all have emotions, we all have feelings. I think it's important that we talk about this too, because I think units need to be mindful of how they treat the officers going through the marketplace as well. I have a very
Yeah.
supportive family. I know you have a very supportive family, but not everyone has that support system. And I would hate for officers to take it as a personal blow to them in their profession.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to take time. This is so new because there's definitely it's like phasing anything in. There's going to be time for us to kind of figure this out to where when in a few years or a next year after that, where you're the hiring manager or hiring officer, you're the one picking the candidate and you know that. So I think it's gonna be a culture change, culture shift, and we know culture takes time, and so I think that's to me. We're probably not going to start, and I have no data to support this, but I bet there's another 3 to 5 years before we start seeing an optimal environment for both the candidate and hiring side. So, because there's definitely some closed-minded mentalities out there where it's just like, oh yeah, you don't meet the rank requirement. It's like, oh great, you're not looking at the person, just what's on the chest. That's cool. Hey, fun fact. Let me tell you where we are on our O5 strength right now.
I agree with you, Zach. I definitely think it's an environment that is ever changing. And I know that HRC and a lot of leaders are try to refine this process. So I think having these conversations hopefully has value to the audience and sharing our experiences as we go through this. So I have two more questions for you today. And I really appreciate you kind of sharing how your experience went. But so, what is the best career advice you've either received or have ever given?
Okay, so I'm gonna equate this. It's not necessarily career advice. It's an example. And so for people who know me, I'm relatively open about it. I don't try to be private when it comes to this. My mother passed away while I was in company command back in 2016, and obviously it was very tough. It was sudden. It was a no generally healthy person. I walked every day and just one of those classic massive a blockage that caused a heart attack, and she passed away. And wasn't expecting it. There was no illness, and so just kind of sudden event. So obviously, we are as we develop as leaders, you think that you're important, and I see this still throughout my time, my short brief career. But I see it even currently sometimes when I'm encountering different leaders, and it's just like you're so focused on the army and the profession that you should be, but there's also their life that we are all living, and we have families, and so there is an example that was given me. So I equate this to my best leadership advice, even though really no no advice was given except an example, and that was my battalion commander at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Ellis, and I'll never forget him for this. My first phone call after I was given the news over the phone by my dad that my mom had passed away. And so obviously I'm distraught, destroyed. But I call him and tell him, hey, sir, it's a Monday, or excuse me, it's a Tuesday coming after Memorial Day weekend. And his words, hey, he said two words. He said, just go. And so I take that with me and I take that example. And so I was in company command, which you think that's important. Oh, and we tell ourselves it is important. It truly is professionally. But in the grand scheme of things in life, at that time, that's not what I needed to be. I needed to be a son, a brother, a husband. And that's just to me, that example of like people first, that is a true example of people first. We give it a lot of lip service in the Army, and leaders are sometimes guilty of that. And so I think we talk about, oh, take care of troops, people first. Oh, but how many times are we showing the example of people first? So in a matter of minutes, someone put on assumption command orders, and I had a leave form done for me. And I didn't go to the office, like went home. And so, and then not even few days later, he shows up at the funeral 3.5 hours away. My battalion commander, him and his wife drove to West Georgia. I was at Fort Gordon at the time, so I was in Augusta, and he drove and came to the funeral and brought a card from the office and a donation to my family because we were starting a foundation for my mother, and they were building a park for her at the elementary school she taught at for over 30 years. So there was just that kind of example of leadership advice was through an example. I'll just never forget that. And I've done my best, which I've fallen short probably 100 times since then, of trying to remember that when I'm put in those situations to really, I say, put people first. And so that's my best leadership advice.
Well, Zach, thank you for sharing that very heartfelt advice. Don't just go. It's very powerful. Oh, thank you again for sharing that. Well, all right, Zach. So we're going to lighten it up a little here. I know I made you go deep there. So we're going to go
All
on
good.
some fun facts. Why don't you share us either a fun fact about you, and if you can't think of one, you get to share what your favorite ice cream is.
Well, first of all, I will say my favorite ice cream is cookie dough because it's the only choice in ice cream for your favorite ice cream. But no, I think I like let's say a fun fact. I mean, it's really just generally I like learning new things, and sometimes that gets me in trouble because I have like 100 different things going on in one given time, and it's hard for me to apply the necessary energy up to one area. So whether it's say learn a new hobby or to taking on a new project at work, or volunteering for something that or volunteering to the church and just being like, yeah, I'll be in charge of this for the entire church, and I just lean forward on that. And so I think that or wanting to be involved in things. And sometimes the old saying, too many irons in the fire, but I think that equates to just I just like to learn new things. I like to be involved in new things and new stuff. And so I guess that's a fun fact or something about me that maybe not everybody knows, but I feel like I'm running 1,000 different directions sometimes, but it keeps things interesting for sure.
When you talk about starting a bunch of things like that, all I'm picturing, and please don't be offended by this, is Over the Hedge, the movie. I'm picturing Hammy the squirrel right now. I hope that's not how many fires you got going.
Oh, but I'm notorious for like starting a project and getting into like the 98%. Like, so you at home, like I finally finished like the quarter round at our house in Maryland when it was time to sell it, like in 3 years. And it was like a little fixer up. I pulled all the carpet up, learned how to put down plank flooring, and redid the kitchen, like put in new cabinets, all like stuff I did. Like I learned how to do. YouTube's a great tool to do anything. And then like there was like a 5 feet worth of quarter round at the baseboard that I'm like, I should probably finish that, but it's time to show the house. And I did it like 3 years earlier. So, well, good times.
Hey, at least when you retire, you have a possible career in HGTV. Well,
That's right.
well, Zach, thank you very much. You are a phenomenal officer in field grade, and you're doing great things for not only the AMED, but the Army. I appreciate you sharing your personal experience going through AIM. And hopefully, this helps our audience as they go through AIM as well, because it is an emotional journey and it is a new experience for a lot of us out there. But hopefully, we can help share some information and support each other. But thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, likewise. And I just appreciate you having me on and let me ramble on for 30 minutes or so. It was a great time.
Thanks, Seth. Thank you for joining us. Don't miss the next episode of the Be All You Can Be MSC podcast. Subscribe now and join our vibrant community of ambitious professionals who are taking their careers to the next level. The opinions shared on this podcast are the personal opinions of the guests and the hosts. They do not reflect the official position of the Medical Service Corps, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.